Last time Doshi was in Dhaka, as well as Yuhani. We had, just to let you know, and some of you may know already, it was the most wonderful program. And in the public talks, there were about 6,000 people.
Wow.
That's the biggest crowd for an architectural event in Dhaka.
When was that?
Sorry?
When was that?
2016.
Fantastic.
We estimated about 2,000 people, and we had snacks and tea for 2,000 people. So you can imagine our stress. 2,000 people arrived.
I think we had to set up monitors outside the hall. I think Adele will remember the venue. That was the same place where we had the symposium, and that was also a capacity crowd, but this was too much of a, and so we had to set up monitors outside so people were just
Wow, amazing.
Right. Well, so if you'll allow me, we can get started. Okay. I hope the team is ready. We have a little video to start off with, but let me first welcome everyone this evening in Dhaka and all the various time zones from where the speakers and the audience are joining today. Really very thankful for that. Today is June 24th, exactly 5 months since the passing of Balkrishna Doshi. And I was reminded about this again by Kushnu here. We are gathered here to speak about Balkrishna Doshi. We are thankful to all the luminaries who have agreed to join and participate in this event. Among them are friends of Doshi, colleagues, co-thinkers, students, mentees. What holds all of us in common, perhaps, is how we were touched by Doshi, one way or another. To speak about Balkrishna Doshi is to speak about an oceanic river. I think that's an apt way to describe him. This may seem a little bit trite, perhaps, but it's my favorite trope whenever I encounter something or someone bigger than our ordinary selves. Doshi's life, his work, and his contributions to the culture of architecture is no less than oceanic. From a drought, if you agree, in architecture in post-independence India, Doshi's work has surged through a kind of parched landscape, inundating it, overflowing it, absorbing from it, and sedimenting it. And not once, quite a few times. And not only within the boundary of India, but like rivers crossing boundaries. Like an oceanic river inspiring, there have been encounters, dialogues, and perhaps some bifurcations, nonetheless, which brings us together tonight. I'm Qazi Khalid Ashraf at Bengal Institute for Architecture, Landscape, and Settlement in Dhaka. My relationship with Doshi goes back to 1984 when I just graduated from architecture school here and was traveling to India. And of course, Ahmedabad was a destination and to meet Doshi, which I was very lucky to do. And since then, he had been a mentor, teacher, friend, and how can I say this, a co-dialogist, if something like that is there. I have written about him many times, about him and his work. I've interviewed him quite a few times for print and video. I have visited him and met him in forums, and he has invited me to a few forums. I've exhibited his work, especially the one in New York, which I recall again now in fondness, and his visit to Philadelphia in 1997. My last conversation with him was on September 18, 2022. He called me, I missed the call, then I called him back. He would do that a couple of times a year. The record is still on my phone. And he would call me, the first thing he would ask me, when I'm coming to Ahmedabad. and I didn't manage since 2016. But in that conversation, we talked about two things. Number one, his desire to return to Dhaka, and Kushnu, you don't know about him, and conduct a long conversation or even a small studio on a boat on a river. And that was a unique idea while flowing on a river. I thought he fell in love with the rivers in Bangladesh. So it would be like, on Saramago's stone raft, disoriented and not touching the ground. I think we can still do it in honor of Doshi. Perhaps some of you can join. We'll do a little conversation on Doshi from a boat on a river in Dhaka. And second, I suggested to him that I'll come to Ahmedabad and with him walk the streets and visit his favorite sites and places. And we will talk. Of course, it will be mostly Doshi talking, but we'll have a camera following him and recording it. Of course, it did not happen. I asked him, but how can you do that? I hear that you're not traveling any place anymore. He gave his sort of little short, mischievous smile and said that I said that to other people. So I don't know if he really wanted to visit or not, but I think, that was the last thing I had discussed with him. So I will begin with a short video from his 2016 visit to Dhaka and the talk. Nusrat, if you can turn on the video, please.
Then I was asking Professor Palasma that supposing there was no word as architecture, and he also partially said yes. I think the word confuses us, and it gives us boundaries, it gives us walls. It tells us that this is the only way. I think we don't talk about it when we talk about music, we don't talk about festivals, when we go to the literary circles, or we don't talk about our food also, or our behavior. We look at everything as one whole, one entity. For us, the entire environment is one. Building happens to be an enclosure which is static, but it is an extension of our body. And that extension is something which we talk about. So when I began to think about this a few days ago, I was wondering, what is this statue? What am I? What am I doing? So I wrote a little piece, and that piece was my childhood. And I was remembering something, and so I thought maybe it is something which is flowing, constantly changing, evolving. And I wrote it saying that learning and growing is like flowing river. It starts with a drop of water. Gradually it becomes a spring, and over distance and journeys it absorbs, participates, becomes part of many rivulets, then becomes a river, goes through the landscape, goes through the culture, and it doesn't say who he or she the river is. River is a river. Ganga and Brahmaputra, they are here, and you can witness them around and you see how they merge with landscape. But then, when they start reaching toward the ocean, they begin to ask question, what is my nature? Because I have absorbed every culture, every time, every place. I have absorbed civilizations, I have absorbed humanity's dance and music. But where am I going? So those many flavors which are there, those create an imprint in the river. And though it flows independently, it doesn't lose its feelings and its pursuits. The river remains river itself. It has an identity. And I think that is what our life is about. What is our identity? Who are we? And why do we have to look at others and say, this is what me or not? I don't think that happens when we are in a family or friends or other places. So what we do is learn to absorb, but we deep within us, we hold our inner calling. If we are architects, so-called architects, but we are lover of art, music, literature, theater, humanity, and friends and family, why should that binding be there and made into a rock solid so that we cannot go? I think that inner quality is what has been holding me for the last 60 years.
We can move to the discussion and the first session of our program today. I would like to invite Professor Juhani Pallasmaa to share his thoughts tonight. And I'm going to give a very brief introduction to each one of you because, I believe, we are in a very conversational and informal setting today. But of course, I have to say, Professor Pallasmaa is one of the most renowned architect, educator, and critic from Finland. He's a leading international figure in contemporary architecture. His works have been found in many countries in Europe and in the US, many awards. But most of all, what I would like to think about that he has alerted us through his writings to the substance of architecture, which from buildings and to the world beyond takes us and brings us back to the body. Professor Pallasmaa.
Thank you. Historically, architecture mediated the human relation with the world and cosmos. In the wise words of Maurice Merleau-Ponty, quote, "We come to see not the work of art, but the world according to it," unquote. In our current age of materialism, shallow rationality, and commercialized aesthetics, the cultural perspective in architecture has collapsed. Today, buildings only express the mundane purposes, the publicity interests of the clients, and the internal ambitions of the architectural practices. At the same time, the mental world of the architect has shrunk from a wide understanding of the cosmos, the world, culture, and human life, arts, and their search for harmony, to narrow professionalist practices aided by computers. One of the architects who represented the true traditions of architecture was Balkrishna Doshi. In addition to being a planner, architect, designer, artist, and teacher, he was a visionary thinker who understood the scope and layeredness of culture, our continued desire to experience higher purposes, as well as the spiritual dimensions of human existence. In addition to being a superb architect, Doshi was a philosopher, visionary, and trusted man of the society. He was one of the true statesmen of our craft, who was respected far beyond his own country. He aimed to improve the life of the nameless dwellers of the urban environments which he designed. His wisdom, arising from Indian traditions of thought, was perfected by his unique experience of working with two of the greatest visionaries of architecture in the modern era, Le Corbusier and Louis Kahn, both of whom fused millennia of cultural evolution and knowledge. Regardless of his exceptional background and position as an architect, Doshi conversed with students and colleagues with a sense of impressive presence and sense of equality. I feel privileged to be able to think of him as a personal friend. I will never forget how Doshi unexpectedly appeared at the railway station of Ahmedabad as my wife and I were leaving by train, the night train to the desert cities of Western India. And he brought a large box of nuts that I had liked at a memorable meal in the Doshi house the previous evening. The train was several hours late, and we ended sleeping on the concrete floor of the station, but Doshi's nuts kept us in high spirits. The high point of my life as a teacher of architecture was the opportunity to teach a few days with Doshi at the Bengal Institute. There was no preconceived program or agenda, as it was a spontaneous conversation about life, culture, art, and architecture surrounded by students. That, I feel, was real teaching, echoing the teaching of the Greek philosophers in the Garden of Academia in Athens over 2,000 years earlier. In today's world of shallow materialism and aestheticized computer routines, architecture needs ethical thinking in its regrounding and role in the evolution of human culture, and especially the existential and mental meanings. My wife and I had the great honor to attend the 90th birthday celebration of Doshi in the gardens of the Corbusier's Mill Owners building in Ahmedabad. As we departed, after 3 days of conversation and warm friendship, I said to Doshi that I will also come to celebrate his 100th birthday. Later, I was getting worried of whether I would myself make it, as I would have been 90 myself at that celebration. Sadly, the possibility of yet another visit in India and an encounter with my great friend never materialized. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Palasma. May I now invite Saiful Haq. Saif is a dear friend, an architect, a well-known architect in Dhaka. He has received many awards, but most importantly, the Aga Khan Award in 2018 for one of his projects. But the most important thing that I can talk about is how Saif and I, in a way, became close to Doshi from this side of the subcontinent. And on many occasions, were able to invite him to Dhaka and then visited India. So there was a sort of a special, I would say, understanding amongst the three of us, Doshi, Saif, and I, about where we are, where would we want to be, and how we consider architecture in this part of the world and perhaps beyond. Saif.
Thank you, Kasi. Thank you again for taking this initiative on behalf of Bengal Institute to convene this gathering. But it's a little bit of an emotional situation for me to talk about Doshi, especially this the short span of time that has just passed of his leaving us. When within a span of an individual's lifetime, one gets to know many people, besides one's family. Among all the people one gets to know, few make an impact that lasts one's lifetime. For me, architect Balkrishna Doshi was one such person. I'm greatly privileged in knowing and becoming a friend of architect Balkrishna Doshi, whom I have always fondly referred to as Doshi or Doshiji. As you mentioned, it is now exactly 5 months since Doshi has left us, and we are here gathered, remembering a great friend. And was not only a great friend, a great architect who has touched our lives and surely having a profound influence on us. I consider knowing Doshi in my journey in the realm of architecture as a great gift to me. And there is a bit of history, as you mentioned, our terms with Doshi attached with it, and I'd like to share with you all that history. During the late 1970s and early 80s, while studying architecture, me and few of my friends were drawn towards the task of exploring the legacy of architecture developments of the region, that is South Asia. The colonial experience had created a disconnection of architectural past, and it became imperative to establish a connection with the past. At the same time, it was needed to be aware of the post-colonial beginnings. In Bangladesh, we had to connect with the ancient as well as the works of contemporary, most importantly, Mazhar Islam and Louis Khan. Extending out of Bangladesh, India, of course, would be the next place for us to explore. And Ahmedabad was an obvious destination. 41 years ago, in 1981 or 82, we landed up in CEPT, the school Doshi founded in Ahmedabad, and got the opportunity of catching a glimpse of Doshi, who facilitated our stay and the tour. Though we did not get a chance of conversing with him, his works elaborated the interaction that we had. More importantly, we were greatly touched by the generous hospitality that was extended to us. We were all students of, I think, second year or third year. And in a land where we were traveling for the first time. And I just cannot forget that time, that moment. Palasma just mentioned about the railway station. From the railway station, we traveled to the CEPT on our own. And once we were in CEPT, we were so much well taken care of by this great architect who was a young man at that time, in 1981, 82. And he made sure his fellows who had come all the way from Dhaka, these few young people, should not have any problem during their stay. He arranged for us to stay in the students' hostel. He assigned a senior student to take us around the city. So for us, that was a very, it was a lovely introduction for Ahmedabad, to Doshi, and architecture. But we had to wait quite some time to have that conversation with Doshi. So in 1985, we were offered with such an opportunity when the Aga Khan Award for Architecture was arranging a symposium in Dhaka, a regional symposium, and most of the important architects were invited, and that also included Doshi. Unfortunately, we did not have the opportunity of having Doshi at Dhaka in 1985 because he met with an accident just before the travel in one of his site visits, and he was unable to travel to Dhaka. So for us, it was a big disappointment. But as Qazi had mentioned, few of us did not give up at the time. And by that time, we had already organized ourselves as a group, and we called ourselves the Chetana group, which means consciousness in Bangla and in Sanskrit. So on behalf of the group, Qazi traveled to Ahmedabad, as he was mentioning, and he extended this invitation from the group, a personal invitation to Doshi for traveling to Dhaka, asking him and telling him that there was a big following, there was a big enthusiasm in receiving him in Dhaka. Doshi had accepted that invitation. But after that, we needed to further follow up the invitation because I don't know, it is, I mean, whenever we get an invitation from somewhere, we'd like to make sure that where it is coming from, who are the people who are inviting us. I mean, when you're even in the South Asian context, even you're sharing the same border. So I think Doshi probably wanted to further know about this invitation. So myself and a colleague, a friend of mine, also from the same group, we traveled to Delhi first, same year when Qazi had earlier been to Ahmedabad. And we met Doshi in Delhi, and that was the first encounter, I mean, where we had a conversation, and Doshi was curious to know about us, about what we were doing. Of course, Doshi was familiar with Dhaka. He was familiar because Khan's work was in Dhaka. But he wanted to know about us, about our group. Mazhar Islam, he was aware, he was familiar. So he invited us to come to Ahmedabad and talk further about the program of his coming to Dhaka. So we traveled to Ahmedabad. Again, we were his guests. And we spent a good amount of time with Doshi. And this conversation we had in his lawn, in his house in Ahmedabad, this beautiful lawn. So three of us were engaged in this conversation, telling him about things in Bangladesh and our eagerness, our enthusiasm of having him come to Dhaka. So all this convinced Doshi that no, he can travel to Dhaka on our invitation, and he confirmed that he will be traveling in the coming year. That was 1987. So that was a time when there was no internet. We had to communicate by regular postal services, all these telegrams. I'm sure you all are familiar with this telegrams and this famous telegram Louis Khan received from the government of Pakistan, asking him about the commission, informing about the commission to design the parliament. So telegrams, letters, all this went on, and the visa formalities. Finally, in March 1987, Doshi, with his youngest daughter, Manisha, Anant Raje and his wife, Amita, and Satish Grover and his wife, Razia Grover, who was editing the Architecture Design magazine, they all traveled to Dhaka. And what a moment, what a time for architects in Bangladesh, for all of us who had been able to bring this, this master from India, from Ahmedabad, to come to Dhaka. And especially his meeting with Mazhar Islam was something that was a historic think. I mean, they were aware of each other, but they probably never had a chance to discuss, talk. And these two great architects of the South Asian, they had this opportunity of meeting together. And it was a wonderful trip. There was a 2-day symposium that we had organized. There were visits to architectural places. And as Kazi had mentioned, there was a river cruise. There was a day spent on the river. Doshi, us, the students of architecture, and other eminent personalities from different fields. And particularly the president of Chetana was a well-known writer, and they bonded fantastically, this writer and Doshi. So this visit laid the foundation of our subsequent relationship. Doshi was so much impressed with the enthusiasm, with the hospitality, and with what he had experienced. I think that Dhaka and Bangladesh carved a special place in his heart. And not only that he enjoyed it, but also seeing the parliament, because for him it was meeting his guru. Doshi had always referred to Khan and Corbusier as his gurus, and he was meeting one of his gurus here in Dhaka by going to the parliament, by seeing the parliament. And not only he saw the parliament, he saw this ancient Buddhist monastic establishments, he saw works of Muslim Islam. So Dhaka made an impression on Doshi. So I think this visit will be remembered and will be part of our architectural history here in Bangladesh, how such meetings, such contacts further develop architecture of a place, of a region. And it was so important for architects in Bangladesh to meet a personality like Doshi. In subsequent visits and trips, my personal trips to Ahmedabad, I had the opportunity of knowing many architects, many people through Doshi. And Professor Palasma, as I mentioned, was one of them. And I remember the dinner we had together at his, that was in the bedroom. We were all sitting in the floor and we were being served food. And what a woman, Professor Chhaya was there. So I think Doshi had that quality to endear people, I mean, from different places. And Sangat, his house, was this meeting place of many cultures. It was like a confluence, Sangat and his house, his residence. So, but it is also kind of a sad thing that we had been meeting and we had been seeing each other, but probably there was much more opportunity to develop this relationship. But we, as here in Bangladesh, for example, myself and Kazi, we were not exactly in the formal realm of things. We were a small group who were committed to architecture, but not exactly the mainstream of things here. But we in spite of that, we continued to interact. And when Bengal Institute was founded in 2015, this provided us with that opportunity. And within a year, we founded the Institute in 2015, and 2016, we had this symposium, second Bengal architecture symposium in 2016 when we finally could invite Doshi again to Dhaka, and of course, Professor Palasma at the same time. And what a moment. I mean, 6,000 participants coming to listen to this great minds. And we look forward to further of such events. 2018, we traveled to Ahmedabad, and Doshi was so much, he was so much joyed to see me and Kazi at Ahmedabad. In fact, Kazi, he insisted because there was an event in Ahmedabad, and he told the organizers that you must get Kazi to come to Ahmedabad because I'm not going to be a part of this event unless a discussion on architecture is part of this event. So he insisted on Kazi that he should come. So Kazi and we traveled in 2018, in the summer of 2018 to Ahmedabad. That was my last visit, and I guess that was also Kazi's last visit. The same winter, same year, Doshi was awarded the Pritzker Prize. Martha is here, and I tell you that for us in South Asia, such a big moment, such a wonderful moment. Since independence, since the partition of India, the architecture in South Asia had a very interesting trajectory, how things were moving, and Doshi being in the forefront. There were, of course, other architects. And this recognition, it sort of recognized this particular development taking place in this region. So we were all joyed with this news, and we all look forward to traveling to Ahmedabad. 2019 passed away too quickly for me, I'm sure for many of us. And 2020, the pandemic changed everything. Travels, something impossible to think about. And somehow, time is like this, how it just passes by. And then one fine morning you find that one of your near and dear one is not with you anymore. I don't know. This was a privilege. As I mentioned, the gift of knowing him, and not only knowing him, to be under such a relationship which was a caring relationship, a relationship which was full of affection. And I miss that. We're missing that. But at the same time, I'm being reminded that his works are here. His words are with us. And that is what will be a guiding thing. That will be the inspiration that I will be carrying, and I'm sure we all will be carrying. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Saif. Perhaps in the discussion, we can bring up some of the things that Yupani and you mentioned. But yes, considering the event today, I'd been reading again the notes, the autobiography or diaries, however you want to say, of Doshi's adventure in life. Saif already mentioned the Pritzker Prize award. Doshi had received many awards and accolades throughout his life, and I don't think I want to list all of them, but of course, the Riva Gold Medal, the American Academy Award, even the Aga Khan Award, those are all very important. But I suppose the Pritzker Prize was certainly a very important event. I don't know, it came a little late, but it did happen. I would like to invite Martha Thorne To speak about, she has written on Doshi also, but she also happens to be the executive director of the Pritzker Architecture Prize. And of course, Juhani was in the jury. But let me invite Martha to share her thoughts. Martha is also the dean of the IE University School of Architecture and Design in Madrid and Segovia. She teaches, she organizes juries and lectures internationally. Martha.
Thank you, Kazi. Can you hear me all right?
You're a little low. The sound
How is that? Is that better?
Much better.
Oh, good. I'm very happy to join you today, and I want to thank you, Kazi, and the organizers for this opportunity to pay homage to a great architect, a wonderful friend, but also celebrate his life and pass on ideas, information, and memories that perhaps will resonate with others in the field of architecture today and beyond in the future. And in the coming minutes, I'd like to share with you what I call lessons from Doshi. And these lessons, like good architecture, are not linked to one particular time, but are lessons that are deep and meaningful, and therefore can be interpreted and applied by people anywhere in a variety of situations. And I just want to preface this talk with one other thought. If I have to leave before the very end, I would like to ask you to excuse me, and you'll understand why and why it's so important. I live in Madrid, between Madrid and Barcelona, but I'm currently visiting friends in Lisbon, and we have a reservation to take a boat ride on the river this afternoon, later this afternoon here in Lisbon. And I didn't know about the idea of Doshi and the river, but when I have heard it now 2 or 3 times, I'm thinking, well, maybe the stars have aligned, and this boat tour this afternoon that I'll take on the river Douro here in the Bay of Lisbon is somehow the stars lining up, and a homage to Doshi in a very special way. So let me in the next few minutes just tell you a little bit about what I think are some of the lessons I've learned from Doshi, and I hope that they're meaningful for the audience. And I understand that there are people listening from all over the world, which is a great celebration in and of itself. Well, one of the first lessons is about time. I had joined the Pritzker organization as executive director back in the end of 2005. And I have stepped down, Kazi, I stepped down and I'm no longer associated with the organization directly, but just in my heart and fondness. But as executive director, one of my main tasks was to work with the jury, assisting them in gathering information, planning the trip that they would take together, and basically making sure that they had information necessary to make the difficult and good decisions that characterize the award all the years of its existence. And one of the interesting things about the Pritzker jury, and at that time Doshi was a member of the jury, is their ability to enter into deep conversations and arrive at decisions based on discussion and sharing ideas. It's not ticking boxes and voting. And of course, in this, it was especially, Doshi was an especially wonderful jury member, because he had the ability and the desire to carefully listen to other juries, and he always presented a viewpoint that positioned the debate within a broader context. Now, when he told me he wanted to step down from the jury and that it was time for others to contribute to the decision, I really tried to get him to reevaluate, believing that his contribution added greatly to the conversation and the decisions of the jury. He was like a moral compass. He was our cultural guidepost in the decisions. But in a characteristic way, Doshi explained that in life, there are different times for different activities. And as much as he enjoyed the camaraderie of the jury and respected the prize, he had other things he needed to do, and the jury needed other voices and other viewpoints and other age representations. So one of the first lessons I learned from B.V. Doshi was about the ebb and flow of life, of accepting change and even rejoicing with it, and in leaving space for new ideas, new voices, and new people. Now, in preparing for today's webinar, and it's so wonderful to hear the variety of opinions and memories and ideas, but I did go back to rereading the text I wrote for the exhibition that opened at Vitra in 2019. And this exhibition will open in Madrid this year in October, which will be a wonderful continuance of the exhibition and celebration of the legacy and teachings of Doshi. And in that text, I said it was important to remember that Balkrishna Doshi himself did not follow a standard path of architectural education. He did attend classes at the Sir J.J. School of Architecture in Mumbai, and he later moved to London, continued his education, taking classes in the evening. But he often commented that his education really occurred when he walked into the office of Le Corbusier. So this is the unstandard way of doing things. Now, how did Doshi teach? Well, his first teaching was undertaken at Washington University in St. Louis, the United States, after having received a Graham Foundation Fellowship in 1958 to travel. And he wasn't exactly sure what he was going to do in the US, but perhaps this lack of experience allowed him to take a risk and encouraged him to experiment with a vertical studio at Washington University, and with the students from different years working together. And he tried to get the students to approach these tasks without preconceived ideas or vocabulary. Now, back in India, when CEPT was being founded, Doshi, again, in a characteristic way, was not concerned about accreditation or standard requirements, but the emphasis of the team and his emphasis was on creating a new type of school where freedom and discovery for both teachers and students was central. He talked about how the school would be an extension of the family, an attempt to change traditional relationships between teacher and student and make the school a more open and welcoming institution. And he also talked then about his belief in the importance not only of architecture, as others have said, but culture, art, music, a truly multidisciplinary approach. Therefore, my second lesson has to do with taking risks and trying new things. Of course, you have to think very carefully in the beginning, but then you have to be ready to take the risk and think in a new way and challenge the conventional structures. And maybe a corollary to this second lesson has to do with the importance of the whole person and understanding this multidisciplinary, this holistic approach to the person, to architecture, and to teaching. Now, Kazi, you mentioned the Pritzker Prize in 2018 when Doshi won it, and the ceremony was held in Toronto. And I think, as you mentioned, maybe it was late. I don't think things are ever late. Timing is always a factor. And, you know, when we look back, we could say, well, if it were earlier or later, it would have meant something different. But I think it was really a wonderful experience for Doshi, and it was really an educational one for me, because all these years that I had been involved with the Pritzker from 2005 and even in 2018, I often received queries by email. I was fortunate to be connected through the internet and email. And many people would write to me about getting an invitation to the ceremony. Well, when Doshi won the Pritzker, what an exception. I have never received so many emails from former students of a laureate desirous of attending the ceremony and honoring their teacher. And it was amazing because many of these emails said almost the same thing, not verbatim, but they expressed the same idea. And let me paraphrase one. I studied with Professor Doshi years ago. He probably won't remember me, but he had such a great impact on me. I would love to travel to the ceremony to thank him. Well, after all the official festivities had taken place in Toronto, Doshi very generously gave a lecture at the School of Architecture in Toronto that was open to students and the public. The ceremony was large, but it was not open to everyone. So after that, he organized a reception. Doshi and his family organized a reception for many of those students and collaborators who were unable to attend the public lecture or the ceremony. They came from all across the United States and Canada to once again spend a few hours with their teacher. And I'm sure that back home in his home country of India, another event took place where Doshi continued the celebration and allowed his friends and colleagues from that part of the world to gather, to come together, not just to celebrate the Pritzker, but to come together in that spirit of friendship and appreciation, mutual appreciation that they had for each other. So this lesson that I think I'm trying to learn from Doshi is by his example. It has to do with the ability of living life each day, touching each person that comes into your realm. And it seems that this idea to live the day to the fullest and contribute in a most generous way to every situation that you're in and each individual that you meet. Otherwise, I can't explain why this outpouring was so great, but I just know that his ability to see the world from the individual to a much broader context and to have this intimate and personal connection, very human and humane, was one that, by example, he's given us all a lesson. And then I read an interview with Doshi where he describes the two great architects that touched him, Le Corbusier and Kahn, and he talked about them as acrobats or yogi. And when in this interview, not by me, but another person asked, well, who is he, an acrobat or is he more a yogi? And he said, well, perhaps more a yogi because it means to search within yourself internally, but also to search within your culture. What is outside of you? What has contributed to you on the outside? And he said that this had guided his search for sources of architecture for Indian contexts. And this, I think, is a wonderful lesson, is to look internally, but also look externally and absorb what we have, what's given to us, so that we can give back in the future. And then finally, I found some notes I had written down about Doshi. And I think it was because we had, over the years, we had brief conversations, probably not as deep as and long as the ones that Yuhani or Saif or Akazi or others may talk about. But his words were so powerful. And commentaries, he would say, trust yourself, always remain fresh. Look at everything and analyze Why are the things the way they are? All buildings have something to say, and you need to walk through them, listen to them, smell them, see them, feel them. Be yourself when you design. Understand context and belong to some place and have something to say for a long time. And I'm sure Doshi is going to be speaking to all of us, and I hope to the audience, for a very, very long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. You'll make it easier for us to move from Pritzker to pedagogy, which will form, I think, I'm not sure, the bigger part of session 2, as well as our next speaker. But I was thinking about being an acrobat or a yogi, and I think Doshi was a yogi who doesn't forget that he can be an acrobat at times. And he did. He was an acrobat at times. And perhaps we can talk about that a little bit in the discussion. But thank you, Martha. So, I mentioned Doshi's life journey in the book that I just showed you, Paths Uncharted. Again, the experiences are oceanic. Some of us who are younger, I don't know, we have that in a different time, 1950s, 60s, 70s. And his contributions as well are oceanic. I don't have to remind anyone here about that. But one part in that area is education, and making CEPT in Ahmedabad one of the finest architecture and design schools in India. So which brings me to invite Durganand Balsavar, a former student of the school, a former student of Doshi, to share his thoughts. Nandan is an architect, environmentalist, writer. He's the founder of Arts Human Settlements Research Collaborative. What makes his work striking and interesting is his interdisciplinary practice in climate change, agriculture, education, and if I'm not wrong in saying rivers. Nandan.
Thank you, Kazi, and the Bengal Institute for this gathering in remembrance of Professor Doshi, who had this rare, very rare generosity of, if I may say, simultaneously being a humane guide, a caring mentor, and a very close, affectionate friend. These are various kind of manifestations that he could embody simultaneously, and which in, I think, many cases graciously extended to the affection that we received from his family, which had a very close bond. And Kushnu is here. My respects to Gamuben, whom I hope to meet maybe next week or very soon, Rajiv and the others. So it's really a certain various levels that we can think about or go back to the memories of Doshi, both as an institution, as an ecosystem, as a phenomenon, as as a kind of set of gatherings or relationships. So there were various levels at which one is trying to go back and understand this phenomenon. Having said that, the first time that I probably fleetingly, I won't say met, but was in the presence of Professor Doshi was in the early 70s when he visited Goa, because the school in which I studied was established by an architect and his wife, who were the architect who was probably the first employee of Professor Doshi. And it just kind of, and who recently passed away at the age of 96, 97, Sarto Armida. But I think it just kind of began to connect a very strange ecosystem which one had not envisaged. And from there, what happened was, in the 80s, I landed in as a young student at CEPT, again, subconsciously, not even aware of what's happening. And then on the insistence of Professor Varki, who had invited me also to be a visiting faculty at CEPT, and with Doshi, I joined as a young intern first in Sangath, and then later joined as a project architect at Sangath. And these were times in the 80s when this whole notion of modernism was being re-questioned. And so the studio at Sangath was really a laboratory of very intense, invigorating questioning, because the elements were in question, the form of life was in question, and it kind of was the threshold to what we call now in very crude terms, neoliberalism or globalization, terms that I fear, but nonetheless exist in our... Over the last year, our conversations with Professor Doshi were about the elusive nature of the human spirit, or about music, or about very carefully observing shifts in the environment, a certain sense of intrigue. And more importantly, about the fragile nature of human existence within which this celebration actually unfolds. And what happened in these conversations was, again, I come back to the river. I agree, I'm fascinated by the river. And though she would often describe the analogy of a pilgrimage or a journey to look at life, and it kind of gave him a certain, I would say, an attached detachment. So there was an immersion, at the same time an abstraction that occurred paradoxically simultaneous, and where he found that the analogy of the river that had very small beginnings, it would begin with a spring, a trickle, would then grow, manifest, and really grow into something magnanimous to actually nurture civilizations, and in the end dissolve into the ocean. And I think that motion, that you can begin with very small beginnings, you can gather memories, you can gather a certain community, and then again have the magnanimity to dissolve. And I think that cyclic process was something that Doshi constantly pondered around, and something that he returned to. And in this context, I would mention, it was just prophetic that this recent book by the Bengal Institute, and I think edited wonderfully by Kazi and the others, on the Padma River, we just received a copy. And in a sense, when I received it, I said, it just recalls this analogy. And I never expected actually Kazi to begin with the play on the river. And it kind of, resonated. I said, this is some other cosmic connection that Doshi would have reveled in. Then he sees a range of resonances and coincidences that have not been premeditated. Coming quickly to, this is a journey, if we look back, that began at the time of the Second World War. Yes, so Doshi's going to Paris. It's really 47, 52. It's really Second World War. There's a formation of a new world order, if we can say. And it was Doshi, I would say, along with this, the first generation of architects. And Doshi was again gracious to actually introduce many of us to that entire generation, because whether it was to Charles Correa, whether it was to Kanvinde, whether it was to Raj Rival, Anand Rajesh, several others, that kind of inhabited this magical, if I can use the word magical, firmament, in which we were all growing with a certain kind of optimism, if one may call it, cautious optimism. And for Doshi, this predicament manifested at several levels, both at the individual mind. It was really about landscapes of the mind. So these magnificent landscapes of the mind, whether it was landscapes of remote villages that Professor Doshi's grandfather had taken him to, or memorable landscapes of diverse towns, manifesting, reflecting various cultural realities. It could be also just sitting on that lawn and then attempting to discover galaxies. It could be the sheer diversity of materials, whether it's mud, whether it's concrete, whether it's a leaf, and just the diversity of materials that encompass human existence with their biodiversity. And of course, ancient myths, which to him were not about looking at the past, but were about containing an anticipation of the future. And I think that was something that triggered Doshi, not as a traditional human looking into past as heritage and myth, but more to look at anticipations and possibilities for the future. So when we come to this point, it is really a moment where Doshi's journey begins with the receiving of something very uncomfortable. Now, these are my layerings on that, very uncomfortable, like modern project, whether it's Le Corbusier or Louis Kahn. And yet attempting or affirming to himself to remain deeply rooted in his own context, in his own landscape of the mind, even as he remained completely open to receiving the lessons of Corbusier and Kahn. And I think that's something which one would like to revisit again at some point in time. And these ecosystems that Doshi embodied, I would say, nurtured institutions, whether it's Sangat dug into the ground like a cave, like a gufa that he called it. So it was dug into the ground. Whether it was a school of architecture that he saw as a laboratory and had the courage to say it's a campus without doors, or whether it is educational institutions like the Indian Institute of Management, where instead of privileging efficiency, Professor Doshi saw porosity. He saw the vagaries of nature kind of inhabiting the space. When they got rain in the corridor. And these were intuitive choices, though conscious, intuitive choices, which I think, in a sense, characterize this search, this prolific, profound legacy. And of course, Doshi enjoyed gatherings like this, whether virtual or really enjoyed these kind of gatherings. It really would often call me almost every week, and I think twice or thrice a week, and instigate me to invite Saif or Kazi or the Bengal Institute. And he was absolutely happy when we began, during the pandemic, we began this online dialogue. We were not sure, whether online dialogue, and everyone was going online. And we were Doshi was deeply grateful that it got inaugurated by Professor Ioanni Pallasmaa, who's here with us. And then we had several dialogues with Saif and Chhaya and many others. And the last dialogue, I mean, it's just prophetic. The last dialogue a few months ago was with Martha Thorne in the Madrid school, and which Doshi fondly remembered. In fact, he kept calling, you would discuss. It was something he needed to process, re-examine, re-question. It was not something like an event that happened to move on, and that was the rare quality about him. And so I see this as a rare coincidence that Kazi invites, a certain resonance that reflects the last 2 years of what Doshi himself absolutely enjoyed and revealed. Coming to that, I think it's coming to the idea of the legacy. I'll close with this. The retrospective and architecture of the people, which I think very sensitively Kushnu has curated. And Doshi would often speak to me about it as something he was profoundly joyous about, because it allowed him to reflect on his own work as a third person and yet be there. And those were situations that he enjoyed, where he's there and not there. And so that actually contains, as I see, the seeds of a very profound, prolific legacy that we can all return to kind of understand how it can manifest in terms of Doshi's engagement with affordable housing, whether you have aranya, educational institutions, cities, dwellings. So in Doshi's own celebratory spirit, I would think that this is a moment to revisit that prolific legacy that is contained in the archives, projects, writings, and drawings. And I do hope sometime in the near future, Kazi, your idea or initiative of the boat happens and we can all meet in real. And I look forward to that. Thank you again, Kazi, for this gathering. Thank you.
That was wonderful, Nandan. Perhaps we can get a big boat, travel from Dhaka to perhaps Mumbai and all the way to Finland via Delft. And perhaps even cross the Atlantic and get to Cambridge. That would be something. So thank you, all of you. And perhaps we have few minutes and something we may have missed in the discussion or something additional we want to say. I just want to point out a couple of things. Perhaps you have noticed the title of our program. Suppose we don't talk about architecture, which comes from Doshi's talk in Dhaka. And Yuhani, if you recall, I had, in my naive way, asked both of you, how would you train a student in architecture? First year, what would you do? That was, Doshi thought a little bit, and then he said, suppose we don't talk about architecture. And Yuhani responded in a similar way, if I recall. That first year, we will not even talk about buildings and architecture. We'll read books, I think, Yuhani, that's what you mentioned. On that note, I recently wrote an essay for a book that's, I think, coming out on the Institute of Management in Bangalore, published and edited by Randhir Singh, who may be listening here. Randhir, if you're there, hello. And the first thing that I noted, and Doshi himself speaking to students on campus at the Institute when the building was done, and he asked, can you see IIM Bangalore as a building? Because it vanishes here. The wall is here a little bit and the pillar is there a little bit. And I don't want to, one can look at it part of a sort of a new tectonic assembly where buildings vanish, or perhaps Doshi's keen interest in penetrating the containment of architecture into new realms of really understanding architecture again. I don't know, Yuhani, if you have anything to say about this. Let us not talk about architecture.
Yes, well, I cannot recall a single time that Doshi would have spoken with me about single buildings, about aesthetics, for instance. It was always a larger context, always socially, culturally, historically grounded situation that he brought up, not buildings as we tend to present them in journals and also in architecture schools. That has also been my attitude in teaching. I have usually spoken about something else than architecture as a manifestation. I have spoken about the things that architecture does manifest, and I think Doshi thought the same way. And as I said in my little piece in the beginning, architecture, in my view, and its education has become misguided by paying attention to individual realizations rather than principles that are hiding behind everything we seriously do. I was very harmed, I would say, always with my conversations with Doshi, exactly because I felt that the real things, the essential things, the real human values were considered rather than their materialization in singular buildings. I believe that architectural education needs to go back to these big historical principles, cultural dynamics and cultural values on one hand, and then how we experience the world. The one thing that I have been wondering is that in almost all professions that we highly respect, the creative ones, in sciences, in technology, in architecture, in the arts, imagination is hardly even mentioned. I'm very surprised because in my view, imagination is the quality that makes us human. It is our most significant quality. We would not even have ethical judgment without imagination, because we need to imagine the consequences of our alternative choices, and then we can make an ethical choice. With Doshi, I recall having discussed almost always the ethical ground of architecture, the ethical ground of culture, the ethical ground of human behavior.
Thank you, Ioanni. I just want to mention one thing more before we hand over to the second session. And Martha, you listed 3 topics as lessons. Perhaps we can add quite a bit actually to that, and that could be another session, lessons from Doshi. But perhaps one thing that I feel like mentioning is, playfulness and admitting contrariness. With Doshi, whenever there's a conversation, now that I'm thinking about it, I never hesitated with someone of that stature. You're in our context, you're a bit reverent. But with Doshi, no, I would encourage myself to bring up contrary things, and let's see how Doshi reacts. So in 1997, he came over to Philadelphia when we did that exhibition, Architecture of Independence. And again, there was a rousing crowd who came to overflow crowd at the University of Pennsylvania. And we invited Doshi to our home for dinner. And some of the conversation got to Disneyland. And Ioanni, you mentioned ethical ground and imagination, but I mentioned that, I'll never go to Disneyland, and I just mentioned that, and Doshi was surprised, why, Kazi? I'll take you there. So, all right, he meant, I really was asking me to loosen up, perhaps. And then in 92 and 93, I don't remember the exact year, the year before, and the construction for the Gufa was about to be completed, and I was assigned to do an interview with Doshi. And he took me to the Gufa. We sat on the ground, and there were workers working around I think it was just the night before the inauguration. And workers were going around, and Doshi and I sat with the tape recorder, the recording machine. Then he brought in a tape recorder and he said, let's hear some music. And he played Ravel's Bolero to the workers. So I think let's also take into consideration there's a mischievous side to Professor Balkrishna Doshi, which we loved. Thank you. So with that, thank you, Ioanni, thank you, Saif, thank you, Martha, thank you, Nandan. I'll hand it over to Soumitra Ghosh. We'll conduct session 2. Shoumitro is also an illustrious graduate of CEPT. He's a well-known architect from Bangalore, and with Nisha, Matthew Ghosh, and Shoumitro himself, they have a fantastic body of work, which are well recognized in India and abroad, published. And so we'll have a little break, another little video, and while we readjust, and I hand it over to Shoumitro. So Nusrat, you can play the next video, please.
We never notice light. We just assume it. But when an object is created around it, it creates a nuance. It is an effort. Each step of the ladder is different. But with each step, you gain a new perspective. Not just see and admire nature, inhale it. Experience comes first, form much later. Create a bond, a sense of belonging, not just with the physical form, but with eyes, with sound, with senses, and then the landscape will begin to appear. I asked, what was important? Was it the form of the building or the content, the space? Look around. Every object around us, the nature itself, lights, sky, water, stone, everything is in a symphony. And this symphony is what architecture is all about. My work is the story of my life, continuously evolving, changing and searching. Searching to take away the word architecture and look only at life. I have been on this search for many decades. And it still mesmerizes me at every turn. It has been all my life, and I will happily be doing it for many more decades to come.
Thank you, Kazi. Yeah, it's a moment, I think, which I'm grateful that Bengal Institute has brought people from all across the borders together on a platform, because that's what Doshi was. He was one who was a constant learner and believed in sharing without, in this borderless world, in his imagination. Remembering Doshi without a sense of loss and fondness to many of us who have known him and remember him dearly, his thoughts, his contribution to education and his work that he has built, and the people that he has deeply influenced. Doshi has been the most important figure for me as a mentor, a guide, and a dear friend, despite the age difference. Doshi is someone I will continue to look up to and think about what he would say for every work that I do. For I remember that anytime he would be visiting Bangalore, I would get a call the day before that he would like to spend the next day and see all the new things that we have done. And I think he's visited almost all the projects since I have known him. I mean, that was his nature, the curious nature, the inquisitive, constantly learning. And I think that was a great encouragement to all of us in our practice. I would like to add a few things towards the end of the session after I have my guests. We have Neelkanth Chhaya, Adele Santos, and Dick Van Gemeren with us. Kushnu is listening to these conversations. Thank you, all of you, to have joined. May I now request, I will introduce Chhaya, who's an architect, academician, and thinker based in Ahmedabad. He has headed the School of Architecture in Ahmedabad. He is deeply invested in teaching about architecture, design, and the environment. And his practice and his students reflect his intense involvement with learning. Professor Chhaya.
Thank you very much, Shomitra. Yeah, this is a fantastic occasion where all of us are together, remembering Doshi. And I think it's difficult to remember Doshi with any sadness, because he had such a sense of life and such a wonderful sense of change that I think it would be just fitting to say that this is a joyous celebration of Doshi. About 2 months ago, before he died, he used to feel lonely and he would call and say, come and sit, let's sit in the garden. He was very weak by then, a month before. But we would spend half an hour in the garden. And one day I remember a leaf fell from a tree. And as it was falling, it was twirling and it fell on the grass. And Doshi said something very, very unexpected. He said, can we sense what that leaf might have been feeling about the two of us sitting here? What might be that leaf's perception of us? And that ability to transport himself into other beings was something that helped him absorb life and make his architecture such that life could take place in it with such vigor. But it also allowed him to make institutions because the word institution has got a sort of bad meaning and a good meaning. The bad meaning is that you manage everything, you iron out everything, and you make a rigorous code of behavior, which was not Doshi's way at all. If we want to add one more word to the yogi and the acrobat, I think we'll have to add the North American Indian concept of the trickster. Doshi was the ultimate trickster, who by sleight of hand would transfer you to somewhere else. I remember as a first-year student in 1969, him coming to our studio, and we knew this was the founder of the school, and we were in awe. And he came to my desk, and I was very bad at model making, and I had made some terrible model. And he picked it up and twirled it up and down like that. And then he asked me, "Did you make this with your teeth?" And we all laughed, of course. And then he said, "Do you want to become a good architect?" I said, "Yes." "Will you make this again?" I said, "Yes, of course I will make it again." And he went out of the class, and there were some senior students outside. And he said, "See, now I got that guy on a new track." And that's the trickster. This sense of mischief, this sense of not knowing. I think this is another thing about him, that he always used to say, "I don't know. I don't know." And from him to hear somebody say, a man of his stature saying, "I really don't know." And genuinely he would say that. And that was the Socratic part of Doshi. It said, "I know that I only know that I don't know." And from there begins the sense that it could be something other. It could be, let us see. And from there, I think, comes the adventurousness. I think Martha, he didn't have any difficulty taking risks, because the trickster wants to leap from here to there, inhabit the body of the person on the other side, and then fly off into the skies. And that was Doshi. And that adventurousness, that absolute ability to take risks. What is a risk? At the most, you will fail. And what if? And how about if we turned it upside down? This must have happened to all of us so often, that you take our model and say, "What about that?" And this sense of not accepting the conventional meaning of anything, and also knowing that in the end, we are just human beings and we are prone to failure. And so what the hell, let's get on with it. And that sense is Doshi, which allowed him to cross boundaries. There are no boundaries. He hated the word boundary. He hated the word wall. So we have the science center, we have the arts center, we have the literary center, we have all of these in the School of Architecture, apart from the School of Planning and the School of Interior Design and Construction and so on. Why did he bring these together? This was the sense that nothing is complete unless everything is heard of, known of, experienced. And that sense is there. But how do you make it happen? And that's where his genius as the institution builder comes in. Not the one who makes rules, not the one who makes formats that you fill in, not the one that who assesses your success or failure. No, not that kind of institution builder. Because he was very suspicious of managerial oppression. He was very suspicious of administrative control, and he was very suspicious of frameworks by and large. So what did he do then? And I think his genius was to build communities. by gathering people of different thought processes around and making and creating the situation where each one was free to find their own métier. And that made the School of Architecture in his time to be this wonderfully vibrant creative space, because every person was allowed to contribute to the community. He would walk into the school and instead of going to the studios, he would say, let's go to the canteen and let's have a cup of tea. And he would prevent us from doing the job that we were paid to do, in order that this sense of community is stronger and stronger. And the ethic of the community, the ethic of people who work together and who discuss things, who make choices, as Palasma said, the ethical choices, that ethos translates into a general flavor rather than a set of rules. And it is that flavor which is continuously being contested, discussed, fooled around with, and made into something the next step. And it is that which Doshi continuously tried to do, whether it was in his practice or whether it was at the school, or whether it was in our friendships. From time to time, he would challenge what you believed, as why don't you go to Disneyland? And he would challenge that. And that challenge was really a form of saying, hey, you built a boundary, and let's not have that. And let's start discussing what is the ethic of our working together. And in that sense, this Socratic discussion that is happening now in the marketplace of internet between us is also the place where so many, maybe hundreds of minds are processing this, and they will have their own ideas. And I think Doshi's main contribution is to be that stimulus that made things move in uncertain, unforeseen, unforeseeable ways. And I think for that, I will remember him forever as that wonderful guy who came and broke my houses of cards from time to time. And that he suggested that maybe you shouldn't only work with cards, but you should also work inside your mind, your imagination, and not talk only about the building. Thank you.
Thank you, Chhaya. And yeah, I remember when Doshi and you were taking studio together, and an incredible moment actually of, and as you talk about his idea of institution and, you know, about the idea of openness, and I think that has been such a significant part of Doshi's work, which is actually community and people, and perhaps that's where we are. That's who we are. Across borders, we've been deeply influenced. I think even Martha talked about, and Yohani spoke about it, and of course one can sense it from Saif's conversation, that so much was touched on.
Yeah.
And I think that's incredible for a human being. So I now invite Adele Santos, an architect and urban designer and urban planner, whose career combines professional practice, research, and teaching. Her work is internationally known for its excellence, and her work is well known for work on housing and settlements. She's worked across different continents, Japan, Africa, United States, and she's had a significant academic career, which includes professorships at Harvard, Rice, UPenn, University of California, San Diego, and she's been the Dean of Architecture and Planning at MIT. Welcome, Adele.
Adele, you are muted. You have to unmute yourself.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, perfect.
Oh,
now.
great. Right,
Perfect.
let me start again. Well, no, thank you for introducing the concept of trickster. I thought that was very useful. And also words like playful and institution builder. And my relationship with Doshi goes way back to the time that I was a graduate of Harvard and got the Wheelwright Traveling Fellowship. And I was studying mass housing across the world. And of course, I landed up, in his life briefly. And he was, of course, like everybody said, the most welcoming, generous. He had a party of, highbrow people. I was just included. He was so thrilled to take me to see his office later, and it was the beginning of a friendship. He always had that big smile. He loved to laugh. And, I always forgot how old he was because it was irrelevant. He was always like a child in a way of just having fun and exploring things. So then some years later, I was actually at the University of Pennsylvania and I'd become the chair of architecture. And he and I found each other sitting next to each other in a very, very boring, profound, otherwise, lecture at Harvard. And he kind of nudges me with his elbow with a big smile, says, let's cook up something. Okay. So afterwards, we went and sat on a bench, and cooking up again was one of his kind of experimental ideas. So he said, well, why don't we do a housing workshop between CEPT and the University of Pennsylvania? And I said, oh, wow, what a fabulous idea. And guess what? A few months later, it started actually, because it took the two main leaders of these two institutions at the time to say, okay. And I took a team of students, graduate students, who, unfortunately, some of them had never traveled the world, so were a little fearful. And he organized the students to stay at hostels. And he and I had a kind of a housing program, a place that they could actually visit and look at and learn. And John Lang, who was Indian born, but actually on the faculty at UPenn, he headed out first just to get them comfortable, if you will, culturally speaking. And they arrived, and Doshi did something amazing. He sent for his tailor. I said, what? He had kurta pajamas made for each student to their own design. And then they had the sandals made, and suddenly there they were. They were in Ahmedabad, and thrilled to be there. It was really amazing. That was completely unconventional, of course, as I was to realize. And that first semester, not one semester, it was 4 weeks, the students produced amazing work because actually they had to leave all their prejudices behind. What was privacy here? It's different. It's crowded, but somehow they managed to figure out how to be private by just not looking, for example. And, there were wonderful discussions about an appropriate architecture for India. He was going through that mulling. What was it, And so, philosophically, he did wonderful things. For example, the people who came to talk, were artists, they were craftsmen, they were, a whole variety of different kinds of people that you wouldn't expect for a studio and housing, affordable housing in Ahmedabad. So, and this went on for a few years. The dean went to Lee Copeland. He loved it. The only thing people hated was the food, but that was their problem, And he actually finally decided that we could put the units that were empty, and he put in, just minimal furnishing. And we had a cook who worked with us, and students, of course, loved that. And all the neighbors came to be very friendly and bring foods that they loved. And so they had an amazing experience. It wasn't just learning about a typology and housing and technology. They also saw life. And that's what he just loved. And his laughter was just charismatic and wonderful. Anyway, we did this for years. And and after a while, I became dean of the School of Architecture and Planning in architecture, actually, in San Diego. And I wanted to bring Doshi to come and help me inaugurate the school, you know, with his wonderful charisma and his ambitiousness and everything else. And obviously a man of great respect universally. So he came and inaugurated the beginning of the school. We had an exhibition on housing, affordable housing globally. Safdie was there, all sorts of people were there. It was really great. And I gave him a 2-week vacation, if you will, well paid. He just absolutely loved it. And he was amazingly charismatic and provocative. And it was a very, very important experience. Sometime later, I realized that I've sort of been absorbed as a member of the family. You know, it's never said, but he loves to build families and communities together. He invited me to his award for, what was it? It was a prize. He was given tenure at McGill, and I went to as a member of his family. And we had a perfectly wonderful time, of course, and all sorts of Indian friends there who coalesced. And then later, you know, I went through to UPenn, where I became the dean. And then he got the Pritzker, and damned if he didn't invite me to be part of his party there too. You know, a family together. It was amazing. But I think what was wonderful was the idea of him building communities, very important, actually. And then some years later, after the Pritzker, we went through this awful period of not being able to communicate because of the pandemic. And I had to teach a course on housing design. I thought, oh my God, what you need to do is have people who will agree to spend half an hour each week with the students and talk about their work. And the first one, of course, was going to be Balkrishna Doshi. He was so excited to be able to come and teach. He said, oh, Adele, I've been missing my students. It's been so boring, and et cetera, et cetera. And when you're teaching online, as some of you no doubt have done, with great dismay, you never know how many people are tuning in. You know, is it 4? Is it 6? Is it 10? Is it 15? Is it 20? Well, when he was speaking, half the school was registered. I mean, it was amazing. There were close to 100 people online. And in the midst of this talk, he said to me, Adele, when you're building housing, what's the most important thing to you? And I said, it's actually building community. That's how I think of the work I'm doing in housing. And he said, me too. It was so amazing, honestly. And he meant it. And then, you know, time goes on. I mean, I had no idea how old he was. I mean, some of us may remember discussing the lack of gray hairs with him as one of the kind of joking sessions. He didn't have a single gray hair until he was, I suppose, in his 80s. And he obviously didn't dye it. He was such a kind of a wonderfully natural person, just not evasive about anything, frankly. And so when he died, I couldn't believe it, actually, that he was in his 90s, because I'd never regarded him as an old man ever, you know. And I went to his exhibition in Boston that had been organized. It was quite wonderful. And Kushnu was going to come too. And at the last minute, she said, he's really quite ill, Adele, and I'm not going to be there. Could you be there and represent the family? I was like, whoa, whoa. So of course I went, and I talked for about half an hour about all his virtues and the wonderful things he represented, and the evidence of all of this was in the show, which Kushnu did beautifully as usual. And they filmed me talking. And I regaled him in the audience then with a story about the students at MIT tuning in to listen to him. And, you know, I was saying things that would make him laugh if he was hearing it, because he loved to laugh. And gosh, he filmed me. And he was shown this actually in his bed. And he said to Kushner, who can verify this, I'd like to Zoom with her. And So she and I talked on the phone about setting up a Zoom. And unfortunately, it never happened. I was actually so sad at his loss. And his memory is just alive in my head. And that photograph you have actually is an introduction to this get together. Just reminds me of how mirthful he could be, how much he could enjoy life, and how much he absolutely had to give everybody. So thank you.
Thank you, Adele, for the beautiful memories that you shared, which are so personal and so believable, thinking about Doshi and his relationship with people, and how openly he accepted serendipity and considered it to be a blessing, and it became a blessing for everyone around him.
That's right.
This was amazing. Thank you for sharing these.
Thank you.
May I now invite Dick to present. I'll introduce him. Dick van Grammen is a professor of housing design at the Faculty of Architecture and Built Environment, TU Delft. He's the founding editor of the book series Dash. He's currently developing the Global Housing Study Center. And he's a practicing architect and a partner in Makino Architecten. He has been the recipient of the Best Building of the Year of the Dutch Association of Architects and the Aga Khan Award. Welcome, Dick.
Thank you, Sumitro, and of course, thank you, Kazi and the Bengal Institute for organizing this homage to Balkrishna Doshi. I'm honored to be part of that. I think that I have, let's say, less of a personal history with Doshi. However, I had the great opportunity to talk to him several times. The first time was when I went to Ahmedabad, also a first time, to be at the final review of one of the Habitat design studios that he organized in Sangat, in his own studio. I think one of the many examples of his generosity towards students, towards all, towards professionals. And Chhaya, you were there. That was also the first time I met you. And I had an opportunity then to talk to him about our work in Delft on housing and my ideas on this global housing study center, focusing on affordable housing. And he was very supportive and interested. And as I had the opportunity to be back in Ahmedabad several times, I met him a couple of more times, and we always discussed housing. And he always made that statement that he thought, with his very rich oeuvre, and I think he made wonderful all kinds of buildings, but he always stated that in the end, housing was the most important task of architecture, and we agreed both very much on that. And our initiative to develop this study center on affordable housing led a few years ago to the idea to make an open online course on affordable housing, focusing on the global south. And obviously, we thought Balkrishna Doshi had to play a role in that. And I want now to share with you, and I hope the techniques will work, a very short 3-minute video as an introduction to that course.
I think we have a very different notion of house, place, dwelling, and life. As an architect, we talk about space as an object, but space in living. It's an extension of the body. It's an extension of our activities. It becomes an extension of our participation. And then that object becomes a dwelling. And slowly it begins to transform itself through additions. Then we dwell there for a long time. And then it becomes a street and a house and a cluster and a town. So even if you go today to the city of Ahmedabad, you will see that people are using all kinds of available spaces. It is the way space is used. The space is being accommodated and action happens. So when I had to do housing, I always looked at it as a living entity, modifiable, changeable, extendable.
So I stopped sharing this video, and well, after a very lengthy conversation with Balkrishna Doshi on housing, and you just saw 1 minute, but some beautiful statements on housing and the home, we had the opportunity, after already almost as a kind of archaeological expedition, trying to see the very first projects Doshi built in Ahmedabad, some in a very bad state, sadly. We went to Aranya, and that was the second part of this video. And although we are not talking about architecture, I still want to say a few things about this project, because for me, this was an important discovery, the project. Of course, it's well known from many publications, but we visited it after this conversation that we filmed with Balkrishna Doshi. And we did it, in fact, the week before the pandemic hit the world. So after, it was in the beginning of 2020. And after that, traveling stopped. But fortunately, we were so happy that we had this material for our course. And as a teacher, I experience every time again and again how very inspiring and important the Aranya project is for both students and professionals. And in Delft, but also, and Kazi was visiting me there as a reviewer when I was teaching. And I met Adele there. It's a small world. And I was teaching for 1 semester at the GSD. Again, I found out that students knew little about Aranya, but once we went into it, did some conversation about it, they all got very triggered and inspired by that project. I think it's still an unparalleled project, and in the way it brings together so many ideas. I think all those important ideas that Doshi brought forward in his writings and in his work, and that will be, I think, really a very long-lasting legacy. His ideas on the city, the neighborhood, the house, ideas of community, that's already been mentioned, diversity, affordability, incrementality, it all comes together in that project in Indore. And I want to end up, let's not share it, I can just explain it, we don't need a slide, but we were walking in Aranya, and as you probably know and could have seen also on the video, most of the basic houses that were the start of the affordable parts of Aranya, most of these houses have been changed over time in quite grand townhouses, often of 3 or 4 floors, sometimes beautiful, sometimes peculiar, but sometimes funny. And I know, and I discussed this with Balkrishna Doshi, that he really loved this, that it really worked as it was intended. But then between all these now quite grand townhouses, we found one little house where nothing had happened in 40 years. It was still basically one room. There was a little front yard. It was quite a mess. It looked very poor. But maybe that was also my bias. We thought, this is quite sad. Nothing happened here. Whereas you could see that all the neighbors, were moving up, literally, but also probably economically in life. But then we got talking to the woman who lived there with 3 sons, 3 boys. And we asked her, of course, well, how did she look at her house and the neighborhood? And what did she think of seeing what was happening around her? Because I thought, to be honest, but again, that's probably my perspective, that it was maybe a bit sad that she had not found those opportunities. But then she explained to us that she was very happy to live there. And I must say the conversation was quite moving for me, because she said, I have 3 sons, they are at school, but I know once they have left school, they will get a job. And then they will start earning money. And then I know that each of them can build a story on my house, like the neighbors did. And that is what my future will be. So I'm very happy in this place. I thought that was very beautiful. And I think, and I want to end with that maybe that for me, you could say the same thing of the work of Doshi. It has a promise of beauty, of a better world, of a better future for many. We find that in his work and in his writings. And I think that's a beautiful legacy for us as professionals and students, but also for the people who live in his projects, in these communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think if we look at so many of Doshi's projects, we can sense that he was not looking at the building. He was actually looking at the life that it would generate. And that for him, life came before architecture. And that architecture will have to be enlivened by people. Thank you for the lovely note. I want to share just a few things. I met Doshi in '89 when I started to do my internship with him. And of course, just like all of us, welcomed with open arms. And I was actually designated to assist for the folding of hundreds and thousands of blueprints for the IIM Bangalore. And which lasted about 3 to 4 weeks. It left me a bit impatient and smelling a lot of ammonia, but it left me immensely rich for having learned all the details of the project, because I had seen copies after copies of these drawings which were being issued. So Doshi knew how to slow it down. That knowledge that you yearn for has to come at its own pace. One cannot rush into it just because you desire it. There were a few things I was reading just recently, and this is an essay which I was introduced to by Professor Chhaya years ago, A.K. Ramanujan's lecture on writing on, is there an Indian way of thinking? And I decided to revisit it and to look for what it meant. Because for me, Doshi has been one of the critical figures who imagined a contemporary architecture for India. And he was in search for that. And that was not an easy search, because he started his work at a time which is very early, and it post-independence, it has seen through liberalization and to a state which is presently almost neoliberal. So he has seen the transformation, and he was in search of this image. So one of the things which Ramanujan says is that the new ways of thought and behave do not replace, but live along with the older ways. The modern, the context-free, becomes one more context.
Yes.
So that was, I mean, I still have to, because Doshi is, despite his simplicity and his fantastic access to communication and connecting with people, I think there are so many layers, but I think the beauty of it is that he would keep it so simple. And I think that's what brought him, made him accessible to a lay person, to an architect, to an artist, an uneducated person. For him, all were alike. So that's a wonderful quality to have. So yeah, it was wonderful to get the insights from Adele and Chhaya and Dick. Really, I can't say much actually at this time, but yeah, it's wonderful to have connected, because I think there are common traits of appreciation which all of us have had with, and I didn't really know Adele's association goes way back, and that's amazing. And all of us have our own stories, and yeah, I have seen the mischievous side of Doshi, sometimes in the studio, sometimes at Sangat, and yeah, that little twinkle in the eye, and the smile when he's waiting for you to appreciate that he's done with his trick. So yeah, so Kazi, I think it's time we yeah, if we want to add something, or anybody wants to say a few things before we finish.
I think we can leave it to that if anybody wants to say something else. If not, well, we had a wonderful evening here in Dhaka. And then thank you, Dirk, for showing the film, actually.
Yes.
Because it brought us down to ground, literally. The kind of ground that Doshi would love to work with and walk on, the film that I could not make with him, walking the streets.
Yeah.
That's right. And it also made me think that, and perhaps I've written about his work in that way, Sangat especially. Doshi was immensely interested in groundedness. I mean, he did all kinds of things, but I think groundedness, how a building merged, evolved from the ground, but also social groundedness. That's ultimately at the end of the day, if I am to learn from Doshi's social groundedness of architecture, and the film brought that up. And which then leads to a couple of things. One is the responsibility and commitment of being an architect in India, in South Asia, in most parts. Despite everything else, Doshi makes us alert to the responsibility and commitment to communities, to cities, to habitats. And secondly, I would say what Chhaya was saying about building communities, and I mean, he was a master at that. And so subtly you will do that, make connections and make communities. The few of us are here is a community, and I can imagine 10 more communities and meetings like that talking about Doshi with equal sort of, energy and vitality. And that's
Yes.
equally possible, right? We cannot claim to be the community talking about Doshi. No, I thought I was very special to Doshi listening to Adele. Well, Adele is more special. He makes you do that to you, as Soumitra said, with that twinkle in his eyes and this sort of, the face, curious, childlike, and he would do that to you, and everything else would then just collapse. In any case, thank you everyone for the time, and Kushnu, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Kushnu.
Best wishes to the family, and perhaps we'll meet in a live way, perhaps.
Yes.
Right, and we'll continue this conversation because it's a continuous conversation. Thank you, Soumitra.
Thank you, Kazi. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was wonderful to be with everyone. Yes.
Thank
Okay, shall we then call it a night?
Yes, thank you.
Or morning.
Thanks, Kazi.
Yes. Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.